The wind moved differently that night, carrying with it a weight the Pride lands had not felt in generations. It did not howl like a storm nor whisper like a warning. It pressed low against the grass, bending the savanna as if the land itself were bowing to something unseen. From Pride Rock, Kion stood silent, his red mane catching the last traces of moonlight, his eyes fixed on the horizon where darkness seemed thicker than shadow. The circle of life had always spoken to him in subtle ways through balance, rhythm, and harmony. But now it felt strained, like a drum pulled too tight, ready to tear apart at the slightest strike. Below him, the Lion Guard gathered, each sensing the same unease. Bunga fidgeted restlessly, trying to mask his fear with forced humor that fell flat, even to his own ears. Fuli paced back and forth, her tail twitching, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Ona remained unusually quiet, scanning the skies that should have been clear but felt heavy, as though the air itself resisted flight. Vesht stood firm, calm on the surface, yet his eyes reflected concern deeper than the watering holes he protected. They had faced enemies before, villains, invasions, and betrayals, but this felt different. This was not a threat rising from the outside. This was imbalance growing from within the world they swore to protect. Kion inhaled slowly, grounding himself, listening beyond sound. The roar of the elders echoed faintly in his mind, but even that ancient power felt uncertain, as though it too was being tested. Rafiki had warned him days ago that the circle was shifting, that the spirits were restless. But warnings were easier to understand than the silence that followed them. Silence meant the unknown, and the unknown had always been the most dangerous enemy of all. Far beyond the Pride lands, in a place where the sun rarely reached and life clung to survival, eyes opened in the dark. They were not glowing with rage or hunger, but with something colder, something deliberate. This darkness did not seek destruction for its own sake. It sought correction, balance, twisted by belief, reshaped by ambition. Voices whispered through the shadows, speaking of a world where the circle of life had grown weak, where mercy had replaced strength, and where destiny itself needed to be challenged. The past had been buried to shallow, and now it clawed its way back into the present. Back at Pride Rock, the ground trembled, oozed slightly enough that even the smallest creatures froze. Birds scattered into the sky, antelope lifted their heads, and the land held its breath. Kion's ears flattened as he felt it ripple through him, not as an attack, but as a message. Darkness was not coming. Darkness had already arrived. The Lion Guard moved swiftly, instincts overriding fear as they descended from Pride Rock and spread across the land. Reports came quickly from every corner. Borders once peaceful were growing hostile. Rivers changed their course without warning. Predators hunted not from hunger but from anger, as if driven by something unseen. The balance that held predator and prey in harmony was fracturing thread by thread. As dawn broke, the sky painted itself in uneasy colors, reds and purples clashing where gold should have ruled. Rafiki appeared at the edge of the path, his staff tapping against the stone with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat struggling to stay steady. He looked older than Kion remembered, his eyes heavy with knowledge he wished he did not have to share. He spoke of ancient trials, of times when the circle had nearly shattered, when darkness did not roar, but reasoned, did not destroy, but persuaded. Kion listened, his chest tightening as the realization settled in. This was not a war they could win with strength alone. By midday, the first true clash came without warning. Creatures, once united, turned on each other. Alliances broke, and confusion spread faster than fear. The Lion Guard intervened again and again, restoring calm where they could. But for every fire they extinguished, two more sparked elsewhere. Bunga fought harder than ever, his jokes gone, replaced by fierce loyalty. Fuli pushed herself beyond her limits, racing from crisis to crisis, her speed barely keeping up with the chaos. Ono's sharp eyes caught patterns others missed, patterns that pointed not to randomness, but to design. Someone, or something, was orchestrating this collapse with careful intent. As night fell once more, Kion stood alone at the edge of the Pride lands, staring into the darkness beyond. He felt the weight of leadership heavier than ever before. The roar, the guard, the teachings of his grandfather. None of it felt like enough. Destiny had always felt like a path laid before him. Difficult, but clear. Now that path twisted into shadows, splitting into countless possibilities, each carrying consequences he could not yet see. From the dark horizon, a low sound carried across the land. Not loud, not threatening, but undeniable. It was unrelenting and deliberate, reaching not just Kyan's ears, but his spirit. Darkness was no longer content with influence from afar. It was challenging the circle of life itself, daring it to prove its worth. And for the first time since becoming leader of the Lion Guard, Kyan wondered not whether they would win, but whether the balance they fought for could survive the cost of victory. The darkness did not return with thunder or fire. It returned with patience, the kind that waited, watched, and learned. In the days following the first great confrontation, the Pride Lands did not fall into chaos all at once. Instead, they slowed, as if the world itself was unsure which direction to move. The grass still swayed, the sun still rose, and life continued, but the rhythm was broken. It was like a heartbeat that skipped too often, never stopping, yet never steady. Kyan felt it everywhere, in the way animals looked at one another, in the pauses before greetings, in the silence that followed questions no one wanted to answer. The Lion Guard continued their patrols, moving from one corner of the Pride Lands to the other. But their presence no longer brought instant comfort. Some bowed their heads in respect, others watched with guarded eyes, and a few turned away entirely. Balance was no longer something everyone agreed on. It had become an argument. Near the Outland's border, a dispute erupted between predators over territory that had never before been contested. The guard arrived quickly, expecting claws and teeth, but instead found words sharp enough to wound. Accusations flew, old grievances surfaced, stories of hunger, of unfair hunts, of generations forced to accept less in the name of harmony. Kyan listened as carefully as he could, but every solution he offered seemed to satisfy one side while angering another. When the guard finally restored order, it felt temporary, like stacking stones on unstable ground. Farther south, prey animals gathered in numbers larger than ever before. Fear had pushed them together, but fear had turned into resentment. They spoke of nights spent hiding, of lives lost to predators who claimed it was the circle of life. Some questioned why balance always seemed to demand their sacrifice. When Besh tried to speak, to remind them of protection and coexistence, his words were met with silence that cut deeper than anger. Even kindness was being questioned now. At night, Kyan dreamed, not visions sent by the ancestors, but memories twisted into doubt. He saw moments where he had used the roar, wondering if power had replaced understanding. He saw enemies defeated, but never truly healed. Each dream ended the same way, with the circle of life cracking, not shattering, but bending until it barely held together. He woke each time with his heart racing, the weight of leadership pressing heavier than before. Rafiki noticed the change in him immediately. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the old mandrill spoke of balance as a living thing, one that needed tending, not commanding. He warned Kyan that the greatest danger was not darkness itself, but certainty. Those who believed they alone understood balance were often the ones who broke it. Kyan listened, but the answers still felt just out of reach. The darkness chose that moment to act again. It did not reveal itself as a single presence, but as many voices speaking the same truth in different ways. In the north, predators were encouraged to hunt freely, told that restraint was weakness. In the east, prey were urged to arm themselves, to resist rather than flee. In the heart of the Pride Lands, the idea spread that the Lion Guard was no longer neutral, that they defended tradition over fairness. The lie was subtle. It did not deny the Guard's intentions, only their relevance. The first major fracture came near Pride Rock itself. A gathering meant to restore unity dissolved into shouting when the subject of the circle of life arose. The Lion Guard stood between opposing sides as anger surged, but this time neither side backed down. When Kyan roared to restore calm, the ground shook, the crowd fell silent, and fear replaced rage. For a brief moment, peace returned. But as the echo faded, so did trust. Some looked at Kyan not as a leader, but as a force to be feared. That night, the darkness confronted him openly again. It did not mock or threaten. It asked questions. Why should balance demand suffering? Why should destiny choose for those who never agreed to it? Why should power decide what was fair? Each question landed heavily, because Kian had no simple answers. The darkness offered an alternative, not domination, but choice without consequence. A world where no cycle demanded sacrifice. It was tempting in its clarity. Kian refused, but not with certainty. The darkness sensed it and smiled, retreating once more, confident that doubt would continue its work. The Lion Guard felt the strain as well. Fuli grew frustrated, her speed unable to outrun the growing unrest. Ono's knowledge brought awareness, but no clear solution. Besht questioned whether protecting everyone equally was still possible when everyone wanted different things. Even Bunga struggled, his loyalty unwavering, but his heart heavy as he saw friends turn against one another. As days turned into weeks, the Pride lands edged closer to collapse. Small conflicts became larger ones. Borders lost meaning. The circle of life, once an unspoken truth, became a battlefield of belief. Kian realized then that the final stand would not be a single moment, but a decision made again and again, even when no one agreed with it. The darkness prepared its final move, not with force, but with revelation. It showed the land a vision, shared across minds and dreams, of a future without the circle of life, a future without predators and prey, without cycles and loss, a future where everyone chose their own path without consequence. The vision was beautiful, too beautiful, and many believed it. When Kian felt the shift, he knew the time had come. The final stand was approaching, and it would demand more than power, more than courage. It would demand truth, even when truth was painful. As the sun rose on the day the circle of life would be truly challenged, the Lion Guard stood together, uncertain but united. The Pride lands waited, holding its breath, as destiny and darkness moved toward their final collision. The journey back to the Pride lands felt longer than the path that had led them away, not because of distance, but because of what they carried with them. Every step echoed with questions left unanswered, every silence heavy with the knowledge that the world they were returning to was no longer the same. The darkness had retreated, but it had not vanished. It had planted doubt, and doubt, Kaya knew, was far more dangerous than fear. Fear could be faced. Doubt could grow quietly until it consumed everything. As the Pride lands came into view, the change was immediate. The land still stood proud, yet its rhythm fell off, like a song played just slightly out of tune. Animals gathered in uneasy clusters, watching the Lion Guard with expressions that were no longer purely trusting. Whispers followed their movement, not of gratitude, but of uncertainty. Some questioned where the guard had gone. Others wondered why balance had failed them in the first place. Kian felt each look like a weight on his chest, understanding now that protecting the circle of life also meant earning belief in it, again and again. Rafiki met them at the base of Pride Rock, his staff tapping slowly, his gaze searching their faces, as if reading the story written in their eyes. He did not ask what they had seen. He already knew enough. Instead, he spoke of endings and beginnings, of how every great challenge left behind a choice. The circle of life, he reminded them, was not a rule enforced by power, but a promise upheld by responsibility. Without that, it would crumble no matter how fiercely it was defended. The darkness returned sooner than expected, not as a distant influence, but as open defiance. Groups across the Pride lands began to reject the Guard's authority, claiming the right to decide balance for themselves. Predators hunted beyond necessity. Prey banded together in fear and anger. Old alliances fractured, and the land teetered on the edge of chaos. The Lion Guard intervened wherever they could, but each action was questioned, every decision scrutinized. For the first time, their presence alone was no longer enough to restore peace. Kian felt the strain building within him, the roar stirring restlessly, responding to his doubt. The power of the ancestors had always been a gift, but now it felt like a test. Was it meant to command or to guide? Was destiny something to impose or something to serve? As conflict erupted near the heart of the Pride lands, Kian realized there was no more time for uncertainty. The final stand would not be against the darkness alone, but against the temptation to force balance rather than nurture it. The confrontation came at Pride Rock itself, where the lands past and future converged. Creatures gathered from every corner, voices raised in anger, fear, and desperation. The darkness manifested once more, not as a ruler, but as a mirror, reflecting every flaw within the circle of life. It challenged Kion openly, accusing the guard of protecting a system that demanded sacrifice without consent. The words struck deep, because they were not entirely false. The battle that followed was not fought with claws alone. The guards stood together, not to dominate, but to defend the space for choice. Best shielded the vulnerable without striking back in anger. Fuli used her speed not to attack, but to separate those on the brink of violence. Ono guided others to safety, choosing preservation over victory. Bunga stood firm where fear would have driven others to flee. Proving courage did not require recklessness. Each of them embodied balance, not as an abstract ideal, but as action guided by empathy. Kion stepped forward, facing the darkness, not with a roar, but with honesty. He acknowledged the pain within the circle, the lives lost, the unfairness that could not be denied. He did not promise perfection, only commitment. Balance, he declared, was not about freezing the world in an unchanging state. It was about listening, adapting, and protecting life without losing compassion. The circle of life endured not because it was flawless, but because it allowed growth. The roar finally came, not as a weapon, but as a declaration. It did not strike the darkness down. It washed over the land, carrying clarity rather than force. The darkness recoiled, its power weakening in the presence of truth it could no longer twist. It faded, not destroyed, but stripped of its hold. The challenge had been met, not with domination, but with understanding. As calm returned, the Pride Lands breathed again, slowly finding its rhythm. The scars remained, reminders of how close balance had come to breaking, but they also became lessons. Trust would take time to rebuild. Harmony would require effort. The Lion God would not be unquestioned heroes anymore, but guardians willing to be held accountable. And that, Kion realized, was what true balance demanded. As the sun rose over Pride Rock, painting the land in gold once more, Kion stood beside his friends, no longer burdened by destiny alone. The circle of life continued, not because darkness had been defeated forever, but because it had been challenged and understood. The final stand had not ended the struggle. It had defined it. Balance would always need protecting, not through fear or force, but through courage, wisdom, and the willingness to choose harmony again and again.